right, good. It's been a good EDA day, hopefully. Does anybody know what EDA means now? All right, that's right. Okay. As you're coming in, come on in, have a seat. I won't make you stand behind me there. What we're going to be doing here, this is a panel, and these are a panel of experts from AWS, and we're going to be talking about different things that you would like us to talk about. In the application, if you go to this session, you can ask questions. This is the time. Sometimes we call this Stump the Chump, but we won't call it that in this one. But really we want to ask the questions that are burning on you that you want to know about, and we'll be feeding those in. Jess is going to be our host, and then I'll let each of you introduce yourselves. And Jess, I'm going to pass it to you. Remember, add your questions to the app.
All right. I'll kick it off since I'm the host. My name is Jessica Deen, and I'm a principal developer advocate here at AWS. I focus on ECS and containers, but I also have a passion for Linux, open source, DevOps. That's a little bit about my background, and I will pass it to whoever wants to go next. We'll start down at the end. Tanya?
Right on. Hello. Thanks for having me. My name is Tanya Boiteau. I'm a principal product manager with AWS Step Functions. So you saw a lot of presentations today, a lot of experts talking about how workflows can empower your EDA-driven architectures. That is what Step Functions is here for, so happy to answer your questions.
Hey everybody, my name is Emily Shea. I lead the application integration go-to-market team at AWS. We help customers adopt application integration services, a bunch of which you've seen in all of the architectures today, and we do a lot of work around helping customers understand event-driven architectures.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Vikas Panghal. I'm the principal product manager for Amazon SQS. You might have seen SQS also in some of the architecture diagrams today. And by the way, this is the oldest service that AWS launched, almost 17 years. But I'm here and happy to answer any questions as we go through.
Roland, Barcia. I'm the worldwide director in our specialist organization for containers, serverless, and integration. Did the presentation earlier on using EKS to scale out with CADA and Carpenter for event-driven architectures. So work with a lot of our customers across the board. Same team as Emily. Excited to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is James Beswick and I lead developer advocacy for AWS Serverless. So I'm really proud to have an absolutely fantastic team of DAs who help customers understand using the value of all these different services.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to dive right in for our panel, and we're going to start with a question for everyone, whoever wants to chime in. Are there any industries that you see event-driven architectures adoption growing in?
I can kick this one off.
All right.
Well, definitely a couple of the big ones that we see a lot of. I think financial services definitely jumps to mind. There's a ton of really cool use cases there around intelligent document processing. Jiraj knows what I'm talking about. Insurance claims applications that need to scale tremendously. Those are all doing a lot of event-driven today. I think some of the other ones that we're seeing a lot of is retail. Some really cool stories. One from Lego that has presented at a few reInvents past about how they have their e-commerce applications scale up to handle huge peaks for Black Friday, and they do it with ease with events. And then also some of the ones that we got to hear from today, healthcare is another big one. So Grant Lammy from Nationwide Children's Hospital talked about their workflows that emit events. So those are a couple of the ones that come to mind that are doing some really cool, innovative things with EDA today.
Anyone else have?
I think the question is who's not doing event-driven architectures. Like the world is event-driven. Everyone's sending events. In my presentation, I talked about I just came from Hong Kong. Just awesome in the gaming industry doing asynchronous inference. Sending prompts asynchronously to models. And so, event-driven architecture, GenAI, there's big symmetries there as well.
Yeah, and actually this leads me to think about even my talk as I open it up talking about how we're in a change-driven world. And because the industry and the world has changed, as I think at this point, everything that's kicked off is there's some sort of event involved, whether that's retail, whether that's finance, healthcare, government, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be a change in state, and you can have an action that fires off on that.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see everybody adopt this because I think one of the problems enterprises have is all this legacy infrastructure and application development where there's so much more coming down from the pipe from customers. How do you build onto that? And EDA provides a very simple way for you to extend your functionality into new applications, to grow into the cloud, to grow into modern architectures. So I've seen just really this take off incredibly quickly, and I think it's been very easy for many developers and those organizations to adopt this type of architecture.
Awesome. All right. The next question, let me go ahead and pull it up here. This might be a little bit, oh, question has changed. I was going to say this might be more towards the PMs, but I have been bamboozled. The next question is, how do you sell EDA to developers, architects, leadership, whatever their hat of choice is, stuck in the past?
So, like, who in the past? So, in my presentation, I talked the first application I ever wrote. I would say it was like 1997, even though I'm only 20-something. But it was 1997. Was a Corba object that took a message from the front end, wrote it onto a queue, and sent it to the mainframe. And so in many ways, like events and messaging has been around. I think the combination of cloud and event-driven architecture is really the killer here. In the past, you had to set up brokers, you had to scale brokers, you had complicated, monolithic enterprise service buses that served in between, and now the cloud is that fabric. And so to me, like, Lambda is the best integration story in the world. Like, you could take any event anywhere, write a piece of code and send it, and then technology like EventBridge and step functions or codified best practices around kind of scaling those rules, those routing rules, those messaging rules, those event rules, without having to worry about scaling messaging brokers, installing ESBs. And so I think that in itself, there's just tons of use cases like, hey, a better user experience or performance, or hey, I have a transaction. By adding an event off to the side, I can take that data, make a copy of the data, send it to a data lake, and do GenAI, right? And event-driven architecture makes all these things possible because I could just take something from here, a data source there, transform it, and now I can use GenAI with my data, my events. And so I think it sells itself, and just giving good examples of how it's used in the industry is probably the best way to do it. But like, there's just so many interesting use cases, and just relating to your stakeholder, to your business owner, to your CEO around how much of a better experience you get from being asynchronous, I think is pretty straightforward once you really think about it.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I feel like some of the power of being able to talk to people about event-driven architectures is it does have this decades-long history in the IT industry, and people have been building it in all different kinds of ways. But I do think that there's so much more power that you get out of building with cloud computing and these cloud services that emit events by default. And so there's nothing that you need to really do or code that you need to write. It's just you turn on these services and suddenly they're emitting events that you can build on top of. And I think that's really powerful, and also is helpful for folks that have built with queues and these different services and tools that have been around for a very long time. So I do think that it resonates really well with people that have been building IT for a long time.
Yeah, I think in a single word, I'd say it's agility, because most of us who've worked in enterprise environments, you're trying to do more with less all the time. And you're not getting more development resources, you're getting more requests from customers. And before I worked here, I noticed one thing that was happening is that the knowledge of what you're building 3 to 6 months from now is getting shorter and shorter all the time. And the problem with that is you then need to pick architectures where you can be sure that what you're doing now will still work 3 to 6 months from now. And this actually gives you a way of doing that. So I think really talking to leadership, agility is the #1 way to think about this. And actually in our team, if you've seen the Serverless Espresso app we've got out there, we had no idea what we were building when we put it together, because it was just a concept app. And we had many, many new features coming in from putting it at reInvent and summits and other locations. And so we were able to bolt on new microservices and features on the application that we really had no idea about when we first developed it. So we saw firsthand just how using EDA can bring agility to applications.
Awesome. All right. The next question is, we've talked a lot about EDA today, which is fitting because it's EDA day. When does it not make sense to build event-driven?
I can speak a little bit to that one. So one quote that I feel like helps me understand this and illustrate this is Gregor Hope, who speaks a lot about event-driven architectures and enterprise integration patterns. He talks about how the degree of coupling between two systems should really be, you kind of make decisions about how loosely coupled or how tightly coupled those two systems should be based on how much control you have over both of them. So if you're maybe a single developer or one small team that has two microservices, you can, when you make a change in one of them, you can also know, okay, well, let's go update the other one. And so it's really easy for you to be able to know how those two systems work together. You can know a lot about them, and they can be tightly coupled, and that's okay. And you don't want to necessarily overcomplicate the connection between those two. Now, say that you have a massive organization with loads of different teams that all need to be communicating with one another. You don't want to have to go all the way across to go talk to another team to figure out what their microservice is doing. You want to be able to have as much abstraction and distance from them to be able to build the service that you're building. So I think for those really large-scale applications and large-scale organizations, event-driven provides a really nice level of decoupling that's really advantageous in those type of scenarios, but is maybe a little bit adding more complication than you'd need to if it's a more small-scale, simple application that you can maintain more easily with a small group.
I'd just add, like, there are times I need to do like a query, right? GraphQL, get back a response, a UI, render a UI. Like, every system is never going to be 100% asynchronous or 100% synchronous. Like, and so, but the more you adopt EDA, the more you get interactive systems, right? And so even for synchronous things, like make a query, there's an event in the background that says, hey, this person queried my system. And that's a source of data that asynchronously happens even during a query. So I think asynchronous behavior is everywhere, even in systems. But like, just be smart about it. Like, I got to make a query, get data back. That's an API call. You're still going to use APIs, but you're still going to use EDA if you want to track that API call. I think most updates should be event-driven because you want to notify other parties. Hey, something's been updated. The more you think about updates to the system and state as asynchronous, the more you could attach to it, the more you can learn from it, the more you could use that data as a source, the more you can learn from your customers. This is the most customer-obsessed way that you can think about things. If you really have every interaction just be able to emit an event, I did something. And you should always be thinking asynchronously in that fashion.
Awesome. James, did you have anything?
I think it's very important to not be dogmatic in any sort of IT decision, because it's easy to fall in love with one technology or one way of doing things, when in fact, as developers and architects, you've got to think about the right approach to what you're building. I mean, in Amazon and in AWS, EDA is used extensively throughout how everything's built. Almost everything is asynchronous, everything is huge scale. But you look at areas like the fulfillment centers where you have robots flying around at sub-millisecond latencies. It's not going to be a good fit. It's simply not the same sort of environment. And so, flying's probably not quite right, but maybe they are, I'm not sure. But most importantly, in each of these decisions you make, don't try to over-apply the same technology when it may not make sense in every case.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we see a lot of is customers that will pair event-driven with and like choreography of events flowing through a system with orchestration, with step functions. And they'll find that there's some areas where they really want to have kind of control over the order of how things are operating, and then some where they want really loose coupling and want to rely on events. And so I think that the pair of those two together is able to build some really strong applications. Taco Bell has some great stories about how they're using both together in their system that integrates delivery partner apps with their point of sale system. I think that pairing works really nicely.
Awesome. Actually, on that, another question, since you mentioned customers and how customers are building, for any of the PMs here on the panel, how are customers using your service to build EDA? What are you seeing in your customer use cases?
So I can go first? Yeah. So there are actually so many use cases that if I have to start talking about it, I think we need a week-long EDA. But I think I go back to the previous questions that we had, like what are the industries where we see EDA? It's pretty much like all industries, and that's where like different type of use cases we are seeing. To give you an example of one of the recent one is retail industry. You might have already bought something from Amazon as part of Prime Day that happens every year. And to give you an example, our services are being used to help customers to drive that retail use case. And typically the way it helps in this EDA architecture is like every shopping or every purchase as a customer that they make is actually treated as an event. And then underneath the downstream systems, like for that event, there needs to be billing systems that need to process that. There needs to be inventory management. Then there needs to be dispatch that needs to happen. So each and every downstream systems consider this purchase as an event and then further process it. That's where our event-driven application architecture actually helps to scale. And if you see, like for Prime Day, typically every year we are breaking our own records of in terms of the orders that are being placed on Prime Day. And the way we are able to achieve it is because of this scalable pattern that we achieve from our EDA architecture. Another example of how customers use is in we can take it in media and entertainment segment. We have many customers, and I'm sure you must be using a lot of those apps. So every time when you sign up for something, like any media app, you take it, for example, that itself is an event. If you are watching the content there, if you want to put something in your favorite playlist, that itself is an event, right? And then if a new content is being released, we want to make sure that all customers are informed about it so that they know about the new upcoming content. They can, again, place it in their personalized favorites and whatnot. So each of these are actually acting as a trigger or nothing but an event. And that event actually goes through, again, further downstream systems and being sent across to millions of customers. Yeah.
Thanks. I think for step functions, it's super interesting because we can both be triggered by events. You can kick off a workflow. And I think, Emily, you did a really good job explaining how events and workflows work together. So things like in all the presentations, you would have seen EventBridge. So EventBridge can actually kick off and trigger a workflow, which would then start a sequential series of steps. So we see that as one way where a customer who might have a team, let's say marketing, would send an event to someone else that wants to care about this in maybe the sales or analytics org. So it's decoupled to kick off a workflow and then be able to sort of move on with whatever is specific to that business or that logic for that group. The other area, and I think Grant did a really good presentation on this, showing how the two can be paired together, is actually using events as part of your workflow. So without even triggering a workflow, you might have it going, in progress, running, and actually being able to send events out of your workflow to somewhere. And it's beautiful because you don't need to care who wants that event. You just need to know that you're publishing it out. You're sending it out on EventBridge, you're putting it on a bus, and then some team that might not even exist today actually wants to consume that event in the future. So then they're listening to that. So we see these interesting use cases where it's both kicking off workflows and sending events from workflows. From an industry perspective, it's everywhere. It really is everywhere. You'll see media and entertainment, you'll see financial services, you'll see healthcare, you'll see sort of your software and internet, you'll see the developer that is literally building their own workflow to be able to publish their own type of blogs across different mediums and things like that. So it scales from both sort of an enterprise, large organizations, right down to a single developer. And maybe I'll just leave you with this. The power is really, though, using these services together, right? Because step functions by itself does nothing. It really is the power of actually taking advantage of EventBridge or SQS or SNS or these bedrock services that we talked about today around GenAI and be able to pair those together and actually use the power of those purpose-built services as part of your workflow. And all of those services emit events. So it just, you can sort of see how this use case becomes endless. You can continue to come up with new features, new examples, new use cases.
Awesome. All right, our next question is the functionality of parallelizing with step functions in massive data processing has been mentioned, but how cost efficient can it be versus something like glue spark job?
It would be hard to know versus a glue spark job if I don't know the use case, but what I can do is describe how you can do efficient data processing using something like distributed map. And I'm going to assume that we're talking about distributed map, which is a feature within step functions, which allows you to process data at massive scale in parallel. So some of the features that we launched this last year at reInvent in Werner's keynote were things like being able to specify specific batches. So for instance, you can decide instead of processing single objects, you can batch them together to get cost and performance benefits. That's one way to sort of help out with the cost and performance aspect. The other option that you can do as part of this data processing is things like you can choose what type of workflow you want to use. So step functions provides two different types of workflows: standard workflows, which are ideal for sort of your long-running workflows up to a year, and express workflows, which are ideal for short duration, so up to 5 minutes, and high-volume workflows, like event processing or things like that. So as part of your distributed map, you can actually choose to use an express workflow, which is more cost-effective at scale like that.
Awesome. All right, the next question is, what are some of the top feature requests for your services related to EDA?
So there's a bit of a light, so I can't probably find the person in the room, but there's a number of requests. I think one of the ones that I frequently get that we'll be continuing to talk with more customers about the needs for this is things like being able to react to events while your workflow is running. So, you know, if you have a running workflow, you'd want to be able to receive events and influence how your workflow then progresses based on the receiving that event. So that's not something that we have today. That's a request that we get for customers as they're continuing to adopt EDA and build out these more robust use cases. And they start to see, oh, it would be really neat if actually I could influence that. And instead of going this way, I want to go this way. But I didn't know that when I built my workflow. So that's probably the top related request for step functions.
Yeah, I think I can go ahead on and talk about some of the requests we receive on SQS and SNS side of things. So SQS and SNS both support two types of options. One wherein you can actually send infinite amount of data, and if you're not super concerned about exact message ordering, so we call them as standard queues or standard topics. And the other option that we have is where you are really, really interested in maintaining the exact ordering of your messages. And typically that is for financial transactions and whatnot, those type of use cases. For that, we have FIFO queues on SQS and FIFO topics on SNS. And one of the key asks that we have been hearing from our customers is that they want the similar level of high throughput on their FIFO side of things, FIFO queues and FIFO topics. Standard queues and standard topics have been like supporting insanely high throughput. Like we haven't heard any concerns from anybody. So on FIFO, we are actually working to meet up to that level of and expectations that our customers have. In fact, 2 days back, we have increased the throughput of FIFO queues to 18,000 transactions per second. And our goal is to further improve them as we go further and make sure that our customers shouldn't see any bottleneck in the throughput. And they should get the exact same experience that they are currently getting with the standard queues. So that's on the FIFO type of stack for both of the services. The other thing is on SNS, it's a service that many of our customers are using to fan out to multiple destinations to build not only their event-driven application workloads, but also to build the data lake type of pipelines. Like on one side, there are logs that they are getting from their systems. They are analyzing them and then taking an action on them. But on the other side, they are just keeping that data, raw data, in their S3 bucket just for audit purposes or whatever. So they ask more and more destinations to be supported as a delivery endpoint. And one of the destinations that we've been asked is to support a private endpoint, which is VPC endpoint. And SNS team is is definitely working out on that, and we should be able to help customers very soon on that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Next question is, how do you see EDA fitting into GenAI workloads? If I don't mention GenAI, then, I mean, I didn't hit my buzzword quota, so.
One of the things we've seen with customers using GenAI is it's actually a very natural async process. And so many people started with endpoints that you're just calling like an API. And then you realize that there's delays getting data back, often you're streaming data back. And then you take it a step further and realize many of these GenAI endpoints need human interaction. You need to be able to approve or see what the data is coming back and taking steps on this. So this becomes an orchestration flow. And so very quickly, in some of the things we've even been building in our team, we've seen there's actually a very good fit between GenAI workloads and serverless workloads. And especially from the point of view of keeping it very low code, keeping it very reliable, and making something that's very agile so you can change it in the future. I think in the next year, you're going to see this really come together in a way where this becomes a very natural type of development if you're building GenAI into what you're producing as a company.
I'll just add, I showed an example of just like prompt engineering asynchronously, sending, prompts to different models and comparing answers, right? You could do a lot of that asynchronously. I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out like what use cases apply for GenAI. But what's consistent is, I've been talking to a lot of customers like, my data is not even in a form that it can even be used to fine-tune a model or to do prompt engineering. And so we're starting to see an uptick in things like streaming. I want to stream my data into a data mesh, into a cloud. I want to clean my data. I want to get a good view of my data and structure it in a way so I could start feeding it to these models. I can start informing these models with my data and create my own models out of these foundation models. So in many ways, event-driven architecture, streaming data, is like essential for your end-to-end data pipeline. Streaming data in, cleaning my data, setting it up, so that I could start doing machine learning. And so I'm seeing this kind of rush of customers saying, hey, help me get my data in the right place, close to these models, so I can figure it out. And then they start using it for things like prompting. Prompting is the first phase as a developer, and then they're like, okay, now I know what I'm going to tune my model with. I need to maybe structure these models, use step functions to orchestrate that into the right way. Like, we're seeing a lot of interesting use cases. So like the fuller picture of data, machine learning still applies, and GenAI is a piece of that. And that full data pipeline is even more essential than ever. And I think event-driven architectures is like everywhere in that process.
Awesome. Another question is, what do you see customers doing that helps them be successful when they're adopting EDA?
I can talk a little bit about this one. I do feel like there are some really great practices that I see some customers doing at the outset of their event-driven architecture adoption. A lot of customers actually kind of, they fall into doing event-driven architectures if they're building with Lambda or SQS, and so it's a really natural pattern to start kind of saying, hey, we're already doing some of these things asynchronously, could we be doing more or be doing it at a larger scale, and enforcing some really good best practices across our organization. So I think I see customers that spend a little bit of time, spending some time designing their events and thinking about their domains and the kind of language that they want to use in their events up front. Not exhaustively. You don't need to kind of think you're going to get it completely perfect the first time that you start to emit events and start to build these event-driven architectures. But at least putting a little bit of thought into it and then knowing that that's going to evolve over time. I think that can be really helpful to get off on the right foot, and knowing that it's a journey that's going to continue to evolve and you're going to continue to learn along the way. But I think that putting that thought into the design up front can be super helpful. And I think that we're getting more and more of these customers like Capital One, Sam was speaking about earlier, some of their processes that they do that help them be successful. And learning from some of those customers that are doing this at very large scale can be a really great way to build some of those best practices in as you're starting to adopt.
Yeah, I would just add, with decoupling comes decoupling, right? And what I mean by that is you kind of lose context when you're decoupling teams. The teams that think about schema design early, in between, do very well. It's a data contract. I think the other thing that people underestimate is observability. And so those that think about observability start thinking about that contract around how do I carry a context like along the conversation, or how do I observe each step? And so folks that have kind of an observability strategy up front tend to do better with event-driven architecture as well.
I would say that with observability, folks that embrace that tend to do better with everything in their stack. I mean, coming from my background with the DevOps is a lot of times people hear DevOps and they're like, CI/CD, yes. But what comes after? Like, you need something that after you've done your deployment, after you've delivered your code to your customer, how are you gauging what you've delivered? How are you gauging what's going to happen in the next sprint? So having insight and having metrics that can give you that data, and then you can either take action on that through events, or you can also influence what's going to happen in your future releases. Observability is key, and it's often not talked about enough.
Shall I go? Or you can go.
You go for it.
Okay, sorry. I think building on the argument further, when customers design their applications, especially their decoupled applications, one of the things that they usually strive for is how do they make it highly scalable? And because one of the challenges with their monolith application is like it's very hard for them to scale as their applications are growing, or as their business grows or workloads are expanding. It's very hard for them to further, scale it with the monolith architectures. That's why they are decoupling their applications using these event-driven applications. And so when they are designing this for a successful architecture, they look at what is the scale that they expect for their applications to be in next 2 to 3 years. And then they design their applications based on that. With that design, they make sure that they use the right observability, they use the right CloudWatch metrics for each and every EDA services that we support in AWS Square. So that way, whenever it is needed, they can scale up. And whenever it is not needed, they can scale down, depending upon their end consumer's demand. And actually, that saves a lot of cost for them as well, because most of our services are pay as they use. So that's the model that is really working out for them. And it at least keeps them, it removes that undifferentiated heavy lifting for them to, manually scale or manually provision the capacity whenever it is needed for their workloads to scale up or down.
I couldn't let this opportunity go, so I'm going to just change my answer a little bit and reference serverless land. So how do we see people be successful? Leveraging the patterns and sort of the best practices that we have such an awesome DA team that talks to customers all the time and builds these patterns out. They're available for you. If you want more, you ask, and then they pop up just like that. So I think that's one of the best ways to get started really quickly and use this effectively. So check out Serverless Land. You saw a lot of QR codes. Serverless Land, Serverless Land, Serverless Land. You need to hear something 3 times, I think, before you remember it. So there you go.
So serverless land.
Hold on, I'm also going to be shameless here. We released, and I come from the containers world, we released our version also of patterns called Containers on AWS, and that's another best practice resource if you're looking at leveraging also containers with your EDA workflows. But rely on the content that's been created from others who have ventured those roads before you. Lean on what experts have done and learn from mistakes and lessons, and it'll go a long way.
I was just going to mention, just rolling it back a little bit, about being successful as you adopt EDA. Just if you're really just starting out, one of the things that's not intuitive is about what events mean for you in the future. And so if you come from the API world, nobody really builds APIs with the intention of nobody using them. You've always got somebody who's intending to call you. With events, it's the other way around, and you have to think about publishing events now that you don't really need at this point. but you're planning for future you, future your team. And this is really incredibly powerful because we come back to this agility conversation. And if you do that, this is what unlocks the ability for you, your team, and other people in your organization to build future functionality, more microservices on things, on data that you don't need yet. And so it's worth thinking about from that point of view. The events and APIs are really the other way around from each other. And it feels a little bit strange when you first start with it.
Awesome. All right. So we have about 4 minutes left. I do have 2 questions. So this next one, if we can try to keep our answers on the briefer end. What are some of the hidden gems in AWS services that can help with EDA? Specifically, what feature or service do you think is underrated?
I got one. So in EventBridge, archive and replay. It's a feature of the service that is just incredibly useful. And why is that? Well, in a production system, you have all these events flying around, and you can archive those. When you want to test a change in your dev or test environment, you can take live data and play that in those environments, and it gives you much closer similarity to what would happen in prod. And it's just very easy to use. You just turn it on, and it just works. So that's something I strongly recommend everybody think about, just turning on in their prod environment.
I would go for Step Functions Workflow Studio and just the drag and drop ability, the export ability, kind of, I see a lot of people using it to brainstorm with other coworkers about what are we going to build and what is that architecture going to look like. And then within that also the SDK integrations of Step Functions. So the ability to not write a single line of code, but just drag in a API call to an AWS service and build that into your workflow is super powerful. And I still run into lots of folks that don't know that those capabilities exist.
I'm going to go real fast. One of the ones that I constantly talk to customers who are so happy to discover this is within Step Functions, wait for callback. So if you need a human to look at something, GenAI, I want to see, is this actually real? Is it the results that I wanted? Do I need to just trust but verify? Wait for callback allows you to do that. So you can have a human in your workflow approve something over limits. Super, super simple as part of your workflow built in. Underused feature, massively valued by those customers that do use it.
Okay, lastly, I'm going to go for dead letter queues for SQS and SNS. They are, again, massively important aspect of our queuing or messaging. Think of them as your digital emergency room. No matter how we design our applications, our customers said that sometimes there are some downstream issues and errors are inevitable. And that's where these dead letter queues come in really, really handy. And with these niche type of queues that we support as backup for our customers, and we also support to redrive the messages back to their original source queues, this has really improved the experience for our customers to handle their error scenarios. And they can build any custom pipelines with their dead letter queues. So I highly encourage anybody who's using our messaging services, and if not using DL queues, please give it a shot.
For EKS consumers, it's Carpenter, right? Just being able to spin up nodes absolutely very quickly for your pods to be scheduled on. It's a great secret. It's not a secret for EKS customers, but I think it's designed for event-driven architectures to spin up nodes quickly. I think in an ecosystem, you're going to have ECS Fargate, you're going to have Lambda, you're going to have EKS. I showed one customer example that was using all of them, and so I think Carpenter, together with CADA, that combination.
I'll also throw out, because I use this in my session, but SAM, so serverless application model, that's CLI, but you can be able to use SAM logs. So whether, yes, Eric, SAM logs. So whether I have like my Lambda function that I want to be able to tail the logs from that, or I can connect directly over to CloudWatch to be able to pull my logs from my container, and I can get all of that information right in my terminal. I don't have to leave to go clicky in the console. In case you guys don't know me from before, but I've been known on stage to say hashtag no clicky. Traditional dev operator, I don't really want to leave my terminal, and I can leverage SAM to be able to get those logs in production, locally, doesn't matter. All right, we are right at time. I do have one question for everyone on the panel here. This is from an attendee of, do you have a favorite customer, particularly and perhaps one in the pediatric hospital space? All right, and on that note, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Eric.
What a great day. Yeah, hey, thanks all. Y'all are awesome. We're in Nashville, I can say y'all, and people know what I'm saying. They don't know that in Japan. So, super glad y'all have been here. Thank you so much for your time. We know it's a lot to step out for a day and say, you know what, I'm not going to work today. And we appreciate it. I'm not going to talk at all. I only have about 10 minutes, and then we'll get to the beer. That's not true. I've got, you can count on my hands how much where I'm going to talk. So I'm going to wrap this up, but we do want to say thank you. Serverless Land, if you want more information, containers on AWS, if you want more information, or talk to us. We'll be wandering around. Grab somebody, ask the question. No question is too dumb. No clicky clicky. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Night.